I should warn you, we only confirmed this session yesterday, so if this seems as if it's a slightly rushed presentation, it's because it is. And I'm only going to be really presenting one very small aspect of my broader doctoral research project today, which is an arts-based method that I used late last year. And I've titled it Pedagogy of the Assessed because it's to do with assessment and critical pedagogies. And I wondered, first of all, if I could maybe ask you to look at the photo on the left-hand side of the screen of Sayu, one of my teacher researchers. What do you think she's trying to say with the gesture that she's making?
Hey!
Hey! Great. Any other ideas? Hello, London, something like that? Or...
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that was the question. Okay, that was the response. Brilliant. Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah, no, it could be. Brilliant. Okay, well, I'm going to come back to this in a moment. This feels a little bit weird, to be honest, to be talking about participatory theatre. I'm going to be talking about participatory theatre and embodiment. So it feels very strange to be doing this as a disembodied talking head on a screen. So I'm sorry about that. But I'm speaking to you today from southern Mexico, so this is the only way that realistically this conversation is going to happen. A little bit of context. So I'm a lecturer at the Universidad del Mar, a university here in southern Mexico, and as I need to be clear about my positionality. You know, I really represent the idealized native speaker for many people in this institution as a kind of white, middle-aged British passport holder, as a man. And that inevitably lends a certain partiality to the lens with which I see the world and which I see this context, which has shaped the research methods that I've chosen to adopt. Oaxaca is a very interesting place to be a researcher. It is as you can see on the map, it's one of the southernmost states of Mexico. It's the poorest state economically after Chiapas, after neighboring Chiapas, but it's the richest state in the whole of Mexico in regard to language. It's very rich linguistically and culturally. There are 11 different distinct indigenous languages which are spoken in this region, and 43% of households can count on having at least one speaker of those languages. And until now, my research has largely focused on washback from the standardized exams that are used in this in public universities in this part of the world. So the ubiquitous gatekeeping exams used in Mexico since the 80s have been the TOEFL ITP, not to be confused with the TOEFL IBT, which is a very problematic exam that only really considers receptive skills and grammar knowledge. So I was initially looking at the impact of those exams on student attainment, teaching practice, and language attitudes or ideologies. And this is part of a broader doctoral project with the rather grandiose title, Reimagining Communicative Competencies. And I didn't have too much trouble finding accessing statistics on student attainment. I managed to gather a huge amount of qualitative data on teaching practice. However, I just found that due to institutional constraints, both here and perhaps also on the part of the IOE, there were specific barriers to actually incorporating student voice in a meaningful way into my research. So there was a bit of a question mark around actually what students thought about assessment. And I'm not the first person to have had this experience at Mexican universities. So Kathleen Greaves in the already 25 years ago was writing about how difficult it was to elicit student student experiences of teaching and learning in this context. So I decided to, given that I'm committed to following the same kind of research paradigms that are advocated by most applied linguists in this part of the world, so participatory action research and critical ethnography. I really wanted to try and find a way of incorporating, kind of retrofitting my study to incorporate a little bit more kind of collaborative ethnography, not just statistical analysis and interviews with teachers. And I decided to go back to something that, a project that I was part of when I was doing my master's many years ago with English for Action, which is a fantastic resource if you ever get a chance to have a look at it. A group of, I think we were 12 teacher researchers, developed a set of games and techniques, to elicit some of the embodied experiences of language learners with a view to staging interventions. So this is a methodology that really has its roots in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is a Brazilian practice, Latin American practice, articulated by Paulo Freire. Education is the practice of freedom through critical and creative reflection and action, but was developed by Dr. Augusto Boal, one of his most closest collaborators, who articulated this idea, this notion of theatre as of popular theatre, participatory theatre, as a movement away from bourgeois theatre, as a rehearsal for revolution through the enactment, the embodied enactment of collective narratives and possible interventions. So for participatory action research, this is obviously quite an interesting approach. So I invited 12 trainee language teachers at the UAPO, the Universidad Autónoma de Benito Juárez de Oaxaca, to come on. There was an elective course in language learning and theatre. We held 2-hour sessions every week for 6 weeks. And the 3 main tools that we used were blackout poetry, image theatre, and forum theatre. And here's another photo of Sayu showing off one of her blackout poems. Blackout poetry, if you haven't come across it, which you probably haven't, is a fantastic tool, especially for working with dry academic texts. Essentially, students are invited to, it's very therapeutic, to take a black marker to a text and try to produce a poem that really distills their understanding of that text into a very limited number of words. So in this case, Sayu's poem reads, "The banking system student containers, listen, memorize, repeat." And I gave my students illustrated quotations from my literature review. So essentially it was a kind of participatory approach to that literature review. They were able to decide what was meaningful to them, which quotations they found useful, and to really kind of process that knowledge. And we then moved on to a process of image theatre. So image theatre is a process whereby students are encouraged to represent words or phrases, or in this case, poems, entire poems, which are read aloud through gesture. So embodiment is really important here again. And so on the left, we've got Sayu, and she was actually responding to a word. She was trying to represent the word dialecto or dialect, which in this context in Oaxaca is a word that's often used to describe indigenous languages. They're not considered languages by most people. There's a pervasive minoritization of these languages. They're simply dialects. They're not considered comprehensive languages, despite their very nuanced and complex grammars, tonalities. And then I invited students to try to make meaning out of these postures that the students had created and arranged the statues into scenes. So on the right you can see an example of a scene of 3 people who were trying to represent the word dialecto. And these scenes could then be animated into moving GIFs. And each character can be assigned a slogan to repeat. So perhaps she's saying, hello, hello. So this is the image theatre section of generating a narrative. And these can then be rehearsed into a coherent narrative from multiple scenes, in this case 4 different scenes, consisting of 9 different characters. And a script was collaboratively written through a Google Doc, which we performed for the entire faculty as a piece of immersive walkabout theatre. At the end of the play, the audience discuss, so that's the forum section, the audience discuss any emergent issues, in this case in regard to assessments, and they have the opportunity to interview or interrogate characters from the play, to replay specific scenes, and most importantly to rehearse interventions. I don't know how I'm doing for time. I've got a couple of little videos. How am I doing, Christy?
You have 3 minutes left.
Oh no, okay, well, I probably can't show you very many of these videos then, but I would like to show you perhaps one example, a quick excerpt of one of the scenes to illustrate. So this is a scene where the protagonist has failed her English exam and had to go back to has gone back to stay in her village with her family, and this is how her family responds to that situation. I should give you a trigger warning. There's some strong language here and some quite explicit misogyny.
¿Entonces qué tienes?
Nada más.
Te estoy hablando, ¿qué tienes?
Ya no voy a regresar a la escuela.
¿Qué? ¿De qué estás hablando?
Es que mis compañeros me tratan mal, papá.
Ah. ¿Y qué más?
Yo no le entiendo el inglés.
¿Cómo chingados no le vas a entender el inglés? Ese pinche libro está en ese dialecto, ¿verdad?
No es un dialecto, papá, es un idioma.
A mí me vale lo que sea. Yo te mandé a Oaxaca para que supieras inglés. ¿Eh?
Pero a mí sí me gusta que mi hija me hable.
Chingada madre, te estoy diciendo que te calles. Como veo que quieres quedarte acá, tú sabes que no vas a estar de flojita, ¿verdad? Vas a trabajar conmigo. Y para que andes de loca allá, pues prefiero que estés acá. Mi compadre Fulgencio, su hijo. Acuérdate, tiene terrenos y ganado. Embarázate con eso.
So one of the very emergent themes actually that came through in the play, which comes through in the title, Te das cuenta, is the perhaps Mexican equivalent of Me Too as a slogan, Te das cuenta. So it's explicitly referencing the feminist movement and that gender dynamic. And I'm just going to show you a very, very brief clip, I'm sorry, Christy, of the forum section at the end, which is the part where there's a discussion and you get to interrogate characters. So this is a bully who has been teasing through some very clever and often quite funny kind of micro-analysis of her of her language practice, of her languaging, and the audience are interrogating him.
¿Quién te hizo tanto daño para que te quedaste así? Y con el lado. ¿Estamos llegando a algún modelo honesto? No lo siento, ya.
Vamos a recomendar.
So just to wrap up, I felt that this was quite a rich way of generating data. It also led to a limited run of a student-authored comic book and a workshop and performance at Mextesol, 2024, which is a very well-attended event in Mexico for ESOL, TESOL teachers. There were a range of suggested interventions, which I found very useful for both my work and for my research, which chime very much with many of the preoccupations that I think many of us have in regard to possible avenues for future more progressive approaches to language assessment. There were also a number of emergent issues that I found really interesting, such as this issue of kind of maybe an intersectional impact, particularly in regard to gender, affective economies, so the anxiety and alienation that accompany assessment practices, the impact on relationality in Indigenous contexts, and also problematizing of pedagogical translanguaging, a suggestion that perhaps it's not always necessarily such a neutral force within the, or even a positive force within the classroom. And finally, I just wanted to give a very brief reflection on how I do think that this is a research method that, in the context of applied linguistics, can really raise a range of concrete interventions that really arise from a comprehensively participatory approach. So from refining research questions to data collection to data analysis, at every stage you really there's a very strong participatory element. It's also an exploratory action research and consequently a decolonizing methodology, perhaps in that it's really raising a lot more questions that it's answering a lot of the time. And I think that it really speaks to many of those preoccupations that we have in regard to action research, user engagement, anonymity, authorship, and perhaps also speaks to this crisis of representation that exists more broadly within the social sciences. So there's a few questions that I have in regard to this practice that you might want to reflect on. But here are my references, and please do get in contact. It's such a privilege to be able to speak to you today, and it would be wonderful to stay in touch with anybody who's interested in this work.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, David. Oh.
Really good to see you, and very, very interesting work. So I have a lot of questions which we can explore later, but maybe this kickstart with one before handing over the floor to our audience here. So I guess I was mostly thinking about the context where you use this these art-based methods. So you said you were looking at a washback of assessment instruments. So there's quite a mature body of work on washback in language assessment. So I just wondered, when you look at what has been done on washback, what do you think your art-based method can offer that hasn't really been explored, I guess, in enough detail in the washback literature? Because like the art-based method is not commonly used in language assessment or more specifically washback research. I'm curious to know what you think you could find, or maybe what you have already found so far.
Oh, thanks, David. I think one issue that I've found in my research around washback, which I think is a fascinating area, and there's some fascinating work that's been written on this area. I am conscious, however, that there seems to be a lack of representation from the kind of populations who are subjected to these standardized tests. So I think, to my mind, it seemed really important to have this participatory approach. I really admire those researchers who have taken perhaps more of a critical stance and who have considered perhaps the broader societal impact of standardized assessment. People like Jamie Shizzle, Constant Leong, yourself. So that's been a big inspiration for my work.
Yeah, Costa is actually here.
Oh, wow,
I think
gosh.
you have a question for you later, but if I could just quickly, yes, I think, yes, what you said is valid, and without having looked at your data or your analysis, I couldn't really say anything for sure, but I just wondered, I'm speculating perhaps with art-based method, because you, in a way, it's more emergent, and you in a way, give them more agency, perhaps the kind of data you elicit will be quite different from the kind of, I guess, information you can get from maybe more like interviews or surveys. So I'll be very interested to see what you found. Thank you for sharing your wonderful work. Do we have any questions from I'll just say hello.
Hello, Alex.
Oh, hi.
I'm Constant here. We really enjoy your talk. So you know, we got lots of questions, of course, I'm sure. But Alex, could I ask you to kind of say a little bit more about how the art space approach, for you anyway, has enabled you to deepen your understanding of how feedback might work in your context. We saw a clip of the theater, and we saw the enactment of the family conversation. You know, the father talking about predestined sort of futures for the for the young woman. How does your art-based approach help with your analysis or some kind of solution to the problem that I think you have identified, mostly associated with standardized testing?
Thank you so much for that question, Constant. And I think it's a really important question. It's something that I'm still exploring myself. I think I just feel that I have perhaps more than anything an intuition that these kinds of more creative ethnographic approaches are really great for digging up some of these very difficult, often intergenerational traumas associated with teaching, learning, and assessment. I think, I don't know if I can show you this slide because it's on a different PowerPoint presentation, but, oh, maybe I can. Yes, I think I can. Can I? Maybe I can't. But can I? Maybe is it here? No. I'm going to stop sharing. So when we presented at the MEX-TESOL conference to a group of about 180 young Mexican students or trainee, young teachers or trainee teachers. They were invited to subsequently form small groups and discuss some issues in relation to assessment that came up in the theatre piece, and to via a Padlet to submit responses to specific questions in regard to how we can change assessment so that it is more emancipatory, it is more empowering, and as I said, many of the suggestions that came up really echo a lot of the literature that's coming out of research, which is a wonderful thing to see. And I think in the case of those trainee teachers at MEX-TESOL, I think that that's genuinely coming from a conviction on their part that assessment needs to be more multimodal, it needs to be more based on the interaction, the communication, that it needs to be more authentic, that it needs to be more transparent. So it was, I have been trying to have a more robust approach to using arts-based methods in a systematic way that comes up with concrete interventions that can be used within my workplace. But I'm very open to, I have found that kind of Padlet format for very large groups very useful to use. But if anyone has any other suggestions, I would love to hear them, because I'm still experimenting with this as a methodology.
Well, thank you, Alex. I think what you're doing is really pushing the paradigm of feedback, because feedback in the established literature tends to be from either the expert, the teacher, to the learner, or peer feedback, which is often underplayed anyway. But what you're doing is opening it out to the community. So feedback now is not just in a didactic situation, but in a real world situation where people are given a say, where before they would not have any say. So that's a major shift. Well done.
Oh, thank you.
I think we have one last question from comment from Ben.
No, thank you very much. In fact, it's not really a question to you. It's a question to those present who run MA courses, and I wonder how much Boalian this kind of method features in contemporary British masters programs.
Can I narrate an anecdote that I had when I was training to become a teacher in Chile, and these are changes that then I saw. So when I was training to become a teacher in Chile, one of the exams that we had was to read Oliver Twist, and to read Oliver Twist in groups, and then make it into a puppet show that we presented to the university community. And because of the standardization of teacher education and all that, those types of activities have been removed, and now it's international exams to gauge the communicative competence of teachers and so on. So it seems to me that that's sort of dying away. That those more creative ways of showing that you knew. I don't know if. But yeah, so what I'm saying is basically all these examinations are now making serious inroads into the education of teachers who are learning English themselves, in some context, or I would say like in most contexts anyway.
Yes.
I can say really just quickly, I know it's just because I know we need to move on to the next one, but just that it's interesting because it came up before about how, TESOL in teacher education, it seems to be so much more focused on preparing students for the workplace, right? And that we kind of lose sight of that sometimes. I think that these kind of creative aspects are definitely the things that sort of go by the wayside in those instances. But yeah, I know this is kind of a much bigger conversation there. So I should stop so we can move on to the next one. Yeah. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much,
Oh.
Alex.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.